Well, that even at the very tail end of Project Grudge, and General Charles P. Cabell, he was Director of Intelligence at the Pentagon at that time. We're talking about the end of 1951. And if you were to go on to YouTube, you would even listen to some of the testimony when they had hearings at the Pentagon, when they had some of the authorities from Grudge report on the phenomenon. And he yelled out, "Lies, lies. All I keep hearing are lies. I want the truth about the flying saucers, and I want it within a month." And he cleaned house. He cleared out as far as many of the staff and personnel at Grudge as that he could. And he appointed the new director, Captain Edward Ruppelt, who would become most famous under his directorship, especially the first 2 years of Project Blue Book, because it was the first time there was a truly conscientious, serious investigation by the Air Force after Project Sign. That they had enough staff, they had enough funding, they truly tried to come up with some answers. And the problem was they were coming up with answers. Once again, they were right back to the final summation of Project Sign. It was all leaning towards this being from off the planet, that this was someone else's hardware manufactured off, as far as on another planet. And there too, where Hynek was always trotted out as the resident astronomer, as you mentioned, John, who, his primary assignment was to always come up with an astronomical explanation. And then you had the Washington and national overflights buzzing the White House in July of 1952, 2 separate nights a week apart. The headlines even beat out the Republican National Convention at that time, because you had aircraft scrambled from Andrews Airfield, you had, as far as radar confirmation, you had ground observation. Something had invaded the most sensitive region as far as of our sovereign airspace in the country at that time. And whatever they were, they flew rings around whatever jets we scrambled up at them. They outdistanced us. They outmaneuvered us. The pilots were yelling into their radios about being surrounded and being chased. And my God, heaven help us if this was something Soviet at that time. Well, it wasn't. We all know that. And yet the Air Force would come up with the explanation that they were nothing more than temperature inversions. Just imagine our Air Force for 2 nights a week apart were chasing nothing more than globs of fog that mysteriously outmaneuvered them as though they were under intelligent control. And then the CIA interpretation that the CIA stepped in to bail out the Air Force. Well, in reality, as we explain in our book, the Air Force asked the CIA to come in and essentially bail them out, come up with a national security explanation as to why UFOs need to be discouraged, why the subject needs to be dismissed, why sighting reports need to be reconsidered. And it was the famous Robertson panel that met in 1953, which would determine, through the course of 13 to 14 days, they solved the entire UFO mystery, where they determined that the reports of the phenomenon were more of a threat than the phenomenon itself. That if there was a wave of sighting reports, that it could tie up as far as our communication lines, and that the Soviets could use that as a smokescreen to launch a serious threat, an actual military threat against us. So once again, just as in Project Grudge, the philosophy of Blue Book became nothing more than a PR front, and that they made every effort. In fact, they were ordered to make every effort to explain away every sighting report that came in. And as you mentioned, John, Hynek started to complain all the more vociferously that he was not getting the hardcore cases, that they were going somewhere else, that the Blue Book reports were being essentially screened.
Preston, go ahead. I know you got a question.
No, I have to go to Roswell because you guys are the big Roswell guys. And my question for both of you actually is, Roswell isn't going to go away. I'm wondering what you think is the future of this case, and are we ever going to see this hardware in a museum? And what is the latest developments that you can share with us?
Well, Roswell is, as far as the investigation is concerned, is passing before our very eyes. As the witnesses die off, I would say right now, of the potential first-hand witnesses, 95% of them at least are gone now, and half of the remaining 5% are suffering the maladies of old age and could not be interviewed. So, but we are still finding, every now and then we do find a new first-hand witness, where we are getting a lot of second-hand witness testimony, but of course first-hand is better. So that aspect of the case is passing away. The case, we're I hate to say we're near the end of it, but we are moving along.
We are having.
Go ahead, Tom.
We've had now 3 archaeological digs at the debris field, and
hello.
Next month
sorry, we just have a caller. Sorry to interrupt you, Don. Go ahead and finish what you're saying, Don, and we'll take her.
And we will be having our next project next month. So, as Tom described, we continue to look for the physical evidence, and based on the fact that witnesses discovered elements, artifacts, pieces, months, years after the fact, we remain confident that there still may be something out there. We've had many false alarms. We rushed to New Mexico on a number of occasions where there supposedly was something hidden up in an attic in a footlocker, or something behind a block cement wall in a basement, things hidden underneath patio stone, that type of thing. And we're the ones, in the forefront. We continue, as far as the 2 proactive investigators, that the slightest rumor, the slightest story, we have to address. But unfortunately, by the very nature of the case, as Tom just mentioned, it also provides, a lot of talk that becomes rumor.
I was going to say the Roswell name will never die because it is truly a household name, just as even more so when people think of UFOs and think of Roswell. People think of Roswell and think of UFOs. But nonetheless, real quick, let's take the caller. Area code 310. Welcome to Third Phase Moon Radio.
Hi, how are you doing?
Excellent. How are you?
Good. I had heard that Don was going to be on the show tonight, and I thought I wanted to call in, and I wanted to say hello to Tom and to Don, and I don't know if you know who this is.
It sounds like Denise.
You got it! How are you doing?
Just fine. Talk about a special treat. We're talking to, if you don't mind, Denise, the daughter of the just recently passed away, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr.
Of course, yeah. We had Denise and Jesse Marcel Jr. join us here a couple months ago, and as we were saying then, this will never die. It's truly, this legacy will live on forever. And we're very glad that you guys are still taking the proactive steps of continuing to follow every lead, because that's what's important.
Well, what was so special for us, and we sensed it at the time, was when it was right after we had testified at the citizens' hearing in Washington. And with Jesse and Denise, as well as her brother, Jesse III. And when she contacted me shortly thereafter, that Jesse wanted to make, as she put it, one last trip down to Roswell. And we could only accommodate him. We made sure that not only that he and that Denise was able to accompany him, and that he even got to go back home, that he got to go back to the old Marcel residence, stand in the kitchen where it all began. And when we all said our goodbyes after that weekend, and he had a smile on his face. He was content. You could see he was at peace. And little did we know that a month later that Denise would be calling us and giving us the tragic news. But nonetheless, he did get home. And I'm very pleased with that.
I know he had a really amazing time, and I just wanted to thank Don and the Roswell Museum and everything that they did. They were simply amazing, and I know my dad had an absolute amazing time, and it was great. I never had been in that home before, and I was able to share that experience with him this last time that he was there. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, he will be terribly missed, and I can only imagine. My own folks are still alive, but as Tom and I have been stating for the last month, the fact that we are now losing the children of the witnesses, demonstrates to us more than anyone else that we continue this race with the Undertaker because now we're also losing as far as the likes of the young children who were involved back in 1947. That time is just fleeting away before us, and that we have to get this resolved now because we won't have another opportunity.
Yeah, time is really our enemy right now.
So what is your guys' take on Colonel Philip Corso in his book, The Day After Roswell, which was one of the few UFO books actually to reach the bestseller list?
Well, we don't. We're sort of have mixed feelings about the Corso book. Certainly, the gentleman had a nice career in the military, and there would have been no need for him to try to embellish on his record, and so he has that going for him. But there are too many mistakes of fact in the book, and I just we were just ambivalent about it. And I know in our Witness to Roswell books we didn't mention him at all, but I think we mentioned him briefly in the Inside Area, the Real Area 51. And we don't want to sort of cast aspersions on anybody, but we just we remain unconvinced with his story.
One of the biggest problems we do have with Colonel Corso is that based on the discrediting of one of our witnesses of old, Frank Kaufman, who was the principal witness in our Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell in 1994. When you read The Day After Roswell, the first chapter, which essentially summarizes the Roswell incident, it is 100% Frank Kaufman. And then when we learned that Corso, on 2 visits to Roswell prior to writing the book, he stayed at the residence of Frank Kaufman. So if he, even accepting, and as we do, his credentials, if he was so directly involved with Roswell, why would he have to seek out not only a witness and essentially research the case, but then seek out the very one who we just discredited? The timing is suspect, and it just it would serve no purpose for us to endorse him in any way, because we'd be right back to endorsing Frank Kaufman.
Right. Well, the case certainly stands alone without any of what Corso, added to it.
Who was Squiggly?
Oh my goodness, Squiggly was the live alien that there were between 4 and 7 total aliens that were recovered from the Roswell crash. Minimum 4, maximum of 7, including one that was still alive. All the others were dead. The one that was still alive ultimately was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And in 1948, the second Air War College class spent a week at Wright-Patterson for, training. Part of the Air War College curriculum was to go to Wright-Patterson for, I guess, to see how a base was run. Well, anyway, part of the week they were taken in, the students, which ranged in rank from lieutenant colonels to generals, were taken into this room and presented with, first all this strange wreckage. Now, this is like 9 months or so after the Roswell recovery. This is April of '48. And they're all, what is this stuff? They're scratching their head. We've never seen anything like this before, all the strange metal. So they were then asked, well, what do you think of it? And they said, well, what is it? And they said, well, it was recovered from they told them that it was recovered from a flying saucer crash in New Mexico the year before. So just, they're thinking, oh, my goodness, they're taken into another room. And there they are confronted with the live alien. And the story is that our source, whose father was one of the students there, Lieutenant Marion Blackmack Magruder,
Lieutenant Colonel,
on his death, yes, he was Lieutenant Colonel, and his son, Mike, had brought his daughter, which would be the colonel's granddaughter, in. He's pretty near on his deathbed, and they're talking about. I said, Granddad, what did it look like? And rather than going into a long description, he just used the one word, squiggly, which to me means something like, rubbery, the rubbery in appearance. But that's what the term was. He just told her that it was squiggly. And so we have an entire chapter about that in our book of how that came about. And it's a very, very interesting account by someone who needed no embellishment of his record. He was a night fighter pilot in World War II, received the Presidential Citation, and upon his retirement, he owned most of the McDonald's restaurants west of the Mississippi. So he didn't need any extra embellishment to his life.
That's right.
One of the descriptions that we often hear in regards to CE3 occupant cases, aside from the disproportionately larger head, is the spindly bodies. And that gives one the impression, so in his case, as far as squiggly, it's the same type of thing. A very slender, almost weak, as far as lower arm and leg, torso area.
We're coming up to our final break. Everybody stay tuned. Third Phase Moon Radio will be right back. Right before we were going to break, we were talking about squiggly, which was a definition that someone gave about one of the live creatures that's being held at Wright-Patterson. Now, there's a live one, but there are several dead. Can we talk about the dead ones? And that's going to lead me to my next question after this.
Well, we have, first of all, two separate body sites. We have a secondary body site about 2.5 miles east-southeast of the debris field. And these were the bodies which were discovered by the rancher, Mac Brazel, and a number of young children. In fact, we interviewed a number of those children, and none of them were willing to discuss it. In fact, if anything, they made every effort to get away from us to make sure that they wouldn't be asked any questions about it. And the final site, the impact site as we call it, is where the remains of the ship, the pod, the capsule, whatever you'd like to call it, but the remains of the crew and the survivor were recovered. Now, as a result of this, there were two separate body flights. One that went out on a C-54 that was piloted by Captain O.W. Pappy Henderson, and the second one went out, was on July 9th. It was within a crate that was hidden in bomb pit number 1. And where normally they would keep a atomic bomb in this particular bomb pit, this was a crate that was under heavy guard. It was loaded into this B-29 called the Straight Flush. And what's interesting is that the crew, their regular aircraft, the necessary evil, was a spotter plane that had flown 2 years earlier with the Enola Gay for the first atomic bomb drop on Hiroshima. And it had all types of weather equipment installed in the bomb bay. So it's just rather ironic that the reason that it could not accommodate that crate was for that reason, or so we suspect, that they had, this crew had to switch to another aircraft, which was called the Straight Flush. And there, under heavy guard, the crate was loaded into the bomb bay. They flew at low altitude, and upon arriving at Fort Worth at Carswell Army Airfield, a bombardier on the flight by the name of Felix Martucci, First Lieutenant Felix Martucci, recognized a mortician he had gone to school with, waiting on the tarmac with officers from the base. So in putting two and two together on the return flight, he would make the response, he'd make the remark, "Boys, we just made history." And what is also interesting about that flight, and Denise's grandfather, Major Jesse Marcel, was on that flight, his return flight back to Roswell after the infamous weather balloon press conference the day before.